Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers. Let's sit around the campfire together and talk about Dead by Daylight. Specifically, my first ever response video. Aw, YouTube milestone, that's cool. Today I'll be taking a little look at Scott Junn's recent reaction to my video about the Skull Merchant rework. Scott, I'm sure, needs no introduction, but I'm going to give one anyway. He's a big DBD creator, enjoyer of the blonde tunneling man from the game that we do not speak of, and pretty much Jesus, if Jesus didn't die for our sins, but instead suffered every allergy on the planet, so we could be free of them and enjoy the summer. In a way, he died for our sinuses. And Scott recently made a reaction video to one of mine. Well, more of an upload of a reaction stream, but that's beside the point. To put it simply, Scott has some issues with my positive take on Skull Merchant's brand new rework. And this doesn't surprise me. I knew that video would get some flack when I posted it, but I thought it would be fun to cross-examine the cross-examination, so to speak, and do a proper response to address some of Scott's issues with my reasoning, and highlight some of the stuff I didn't cover in the first video. Before we get into it though, I just want to set a few things out. First of all, this isn't supposed to be me beefing with Scott at all. I know he's been under the weather with his health issues lately, and I wish him a swift recovery. Seriously. I know Scott wouldn't see this as me starting shit, but this is kind of more for outside viewers who might not get it. In addition, there was one thing I wanted to clear up on my end that I noticed people getting confused on. When I was talking about the killers I didn't like for the past year, I put Sadako, Dredge and Singularity up on screen. People seem to think that this is me hating those killers. If anything, it's the opposite. Of the killers we've had in the last 2 years, these are the ones I think I like the most, and I don't think I made that clear. Before any more Dredge or Singularity fans get mad at me for dissing their favourite amorphous blob. I don't like any of them enough to play them regularly, but they're not objectionable, they're just not particularly exciting to me. And with the prologue squared away, it's time now for the main event. The central argument that Scott makes in this video is the idea that even regardless of her power level, Skull Merchant's power design will always be unhealthy because her power, when it works properly, leaves the survivor with no options for reasonable counterplay. The drone goes down, you leave the loop or you drop a health state, in the vein of turbo zoners like Knight or Artist. And because she's now actually a pretty healthy design, these buffs won't risk making her a problem like a prior iteration.
You out of your goddamn mind.
The buffs are done right at least. I'll be covering what I would do to buff her later on in the video, but before we
Bro, how is it healthy design? She puts up drone, you leave loop. If you don't leave loop, you get injured. If you do leave loop, you get injured but no claw trap. Repeat until edge of map and then you eventually go down. Like, oh god, it's just the standard use power, leave loop bullshit that we've had with like 7 out of like 10 recent killers.
He claims therefore this is not a matter of personal taste, but of objectively poor design. And to put it simply, I couldn't disagree more, but let's give Scott's argument a little bit of credit for now. He claims that at a tile, all you do with Skull Merchant is throw a drone down at a tile, and at a tile where its LOS isn't obstructed, the survivor has to leave the loop or immediately get hit. And for the sake of argument, we're going to assume that that's the case. It isn't the case, and I'll demonstrate exactly why that is later, but let's put a pin in this idea for now, give the benefit of the doubt, and assume that he's right. Scott seems to believe that makes for objectively bad killer design because its skill expression of both sides doesn't matter. The outcome was not skillful, but instead the end point of a fixed chase time. The example that he used here is Old Legion, a killer where that was indisputably true. There was no interacting with Legion in any way before. You ran away or you died, with zero skill expression of any sort on either side. He compares New Skull Merchant to this, which, I'll be real with you, makes zero sense to me. Even assuming you have no mechanical outplay potential in the moment itself, the fact that you can disable drones ahead of time when she places them is one of her interaction points here. If she's just throwing them down at every tile, her cooldown is pretty hefty, she only has a set number of them, and once they're already injured, they're not even particularly threatening. So all you gotta do is stay injured and your chances are gonna be more or less unaffected. In that way, she's more like New Legion than Old Legion. And if she's deploying them as stealth or as traps, she isn't going to have them to throw down in chases, and you can disable them ahead of time and path around drones that you know are out of action if you're on the ball. Unless I just forgot the patch where you could remove Old Legion's power with a hacking minigame. Sorry, my memory's a bit foggy. For those who don't know, Skull Merchant's drones don't cycle like Hag's Trap or Singularity's biopods do. If you're out of drones, you have to collect one that's already out there in the environment if you want to place another, which puts your power on cooldown. And knowing how to manage that cooldown sets apart a good Skull Merchant from a bad one. A good Skull Merchant will know when she doesn't need to use her power and can spend her cooldown recalling a drone instead of placing one to make sure that she has a drone available when she needs it. while a bad Skull Merchant won't think ahead that far and will frequently find themselves blueboard out of their power, either because they've run out of drones, or because they should have recalled a drone earlier than they ended up doing, and now can't place one when they need it because of the cooldown. Keeping track of how many drones she has at her disposal and the cooldown between placing them is a key part of playing against her as Survivor. After all, if she just slams down a drone, at every loop she'll run out of them pretty damn fast, and that's when her drone management will come into play. That is skill expression on the killer's part, the kind of thing that practice and game sense will allow you to optimise. And playing around her drone cooldowns, pathing around drones that you know are already in the environment, and disabling drones ahead of time in places that you want to chase that might cause problems for you later, are part of the Survivor skill expression of playing against her. Again, this is all assuming that there's no strict mechanical counterplay to her, which, as I'll go into later, there is. Scott doesn't seem to think this interaction counts as interaction, or at least doesn't think it's fun. Well, fair enough. If you don't think that's fun, that's your prerogative. But to claim therefore that this skill expression doesn't exist, or to erase it because it isn't mechanical outplaying is asinine to me. With solely mechanical skill expression, in the vein of Blight, Wesker or Xenomorph, then I understand why this rework could be underwhelming for you. But you've got to understand here, no matter what they did to Skull Merchant...
See, what he's getting at, confident, thank you for the 200 bits, man. Waska. I get what he's saying. Not every killer has to be... I get a lot of shit for this. Like, Scott wants every killer to be Wesker. Scott wants every killer to have some type of mechanical skill component. So there's some, semblance of having to learn something and some semblance of outplaying them and playing well as them. So there's interaction between both sides. But there's a reason I say that. Because if you have a scenario where killers are given essentially free hits like Knight or, Skull Merchant if the area is zoned out, if they're given free hits while doing nothing, while exemplifying zero skill in any way, I just think that is something that is harmful to the health of the game.
It really doesn't help that Scott misrepresents what I say when I said that Skull Merchant has trap-hitting skill expression like no other killer has. Because the way he reacts suggests that I'm saying she's some Giga Brain Supreme skill playing DBD on hard mode sort of deal, when literally all that I'm saying is that the way she sets traps and incentivizes to chase around them is different from the other trap killers, which is clearly and quantifiably obviously true. I don't know why Scott's treating the statement with such derision unless he just doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. My commenters seem to get this just fine, and even in the comments on Scott's video there's some talk of it, so clearly it's there, Scott just didn't see it. The only way comparing New Skull Merchant to Old Legion, or even to Knight, makes sense is if you're strictly talking about mechanical counterplay in a 1v1 situation, which is logical to assume that Scott's talking about here. And in this hypothetical scenario where Skull Merchant has no mechanical counterplay, then yeah, Skull Merchant has no mechanical counterplay. Well, that doesn't make the killer objectively poorly designed. Scott asserts that she is because she can get a health state for free, and he claims that a survivor should never be in a position where losing the health state is an inevitability, where you can take a hit with no mechanical play that you can make to prevent it. In a tile and they run into it unawares, there's a good chance they won't have a choice in the matter and will just get a stack before they can react.
Isn't that shit design? There's a good choice, or there's a good chance they'll have no choice in the matter. I don't know how he can say those words and not realize that's a huge problem. The survivor can have no choice in a scenario. Isn't that just horrible, horrible game design? Like, that's so bad. You should never have zero choices in a scenario.
And here's where him and I are gonna have to disagree. Because being able to get a hit on a survivor without them being able to mechanically outplay it is literally how Dead by Daylight works for all killers at a fundamental level. There is a reason you can't rebuild a pallet after it's broken. There's a reason a survivor's value to their team can be measured in the amount of the killer's time that they waste. And it's because, as much as Scott would like it to be, the core game of Dead by Daylight is not a 1v1. It's a 1v4. Not a Dark Souls PvP, but a game of resource management. You think it's bad when Skull Merchant gets a free health state because the tile placements and drone LOS allow her drone to claw trap you? Just wait until a Legion or Plague injures you with their power, or until a Blight spacebars the pallet and hits you in the open before you can make it to the next resource.
On the loops that you can't use your power, run around it once or twice. It'll take 9-10 seconds. It's not a big deal. But then once you break the pallet, you can catch back up in literally 2 seconds. And then this is how you're going to get a lot of your hits. Because you can't actually hit people at the short loops, but you can catch back up after you break the pallet. So,
or until you're in chase with literally any killer ever, and there's no resources to use because the killer has broken all the pallets. I want to take a proper look at the Blight example here though, to show you what I mean, because Scott espousing the Scottish Crack Addict as a paragon of killer design really showed where logical consistency falls apart. Because Blight puts survivors in so many get hit or get hit situations, especially if you play him the way Scott suggested. You force the pallet out as an M1 killer, you spacebar the pallet down, and unless there's a tile within spitting distance of the last one, you close the gap and get the hit before they have an opportunity to get somewhere where they can make a play. I'm sure the Meg in this clip felt really outplayed by having to use the tile resource, and then immediately dying because the nearest pallet is further than 2 inches away from the last one, so you just get to run her down like a dog. What was the right play for her to make in this situation? What was the choice she should have made here?
that's so bad. You should never have 0 choices in a scenario.
I guess maybe Blight can miss his hit there, but she's got no resources and you've got 3 more rushes. If you didn't get that hit with that table-sized hitbox, she didn't outplay you. You just fumbled the freest hit of your fucking life. But as Scott said, survivors should always have a choice. So when are we getting the video entitled "The Problem with Blight is Fundamental Design"? Maybe I'm complaining about this too much, but I just don't see the thought process here where the killer who can easily get the first hit is via face checks a drone is shit design, but the killer who can easily get both health states by just eating your distance is not only a paragon of good design, but it's also the playstyle Scott actively encourages in his guide. And it's that cognitive dissonance I'm trying to address, because I don't understand what makes Skull Merchant's free hits terrible design, but makes Blight's free hits great design. My point is that in this game, there are always situations where making outplays will not save you. Regardless of the choices that you make, you will lose a health state, and there's nothing you can do about it. I know that Scott knows this. He's made videos talking about this exact principle being called to the gameplay of Killer. This is actually why I love Twins so much, because Twins lay DBD's principles of resource and time management bare. But I talked about that in my Twins guide, so I won't go into it here. This perspective is a symptom of Scott, by his own admission, only enjoying one part of Dead by Daylight, the direct chase, the 1v1. That is an entirely fine thing to enjoy. But when you start to claim that X or Y is good or bad design, based on the criteria of the one thing you enjoy, we're going to have a problem, because that's really shitty criteria for a good or bad design. It's actually extremely telling that he says Singularity is an example of niche macro play killer whose design is to him acceptable, when the way that Scott plays him and advocates that others play him completely ignores that macro play element.
If it ends up being a niche-based killer, it's okay if it's something like Singularity, who at least has interesting stuff going on that is not inherently super miserable to go against. So you want to play this killer like a chase killer. Hit me!
No wonder he thinks Singularity's design is good, but hates the other macro play killers, because Singularity lets Scott do what Scott enjoys doing. For want of a better word, bulldozing through chases. And Scott genuinely doesn't seem to understand the appeal of playing a killer whose power budget and skill expression lies in other areas. And you can tell this because even when he's talking about Skull Merchant and Singularity doing the exact same thing in the exact same context, he treats Skull Merchant like she's the worst thing on earth, but it doesn't seem to mind when Singularity does it.
She puts up drone, you leave loop. If you don't leave loop, you get injured. If you do leave loop, you get injured, but no claw trap. Repeat until edge of map, and then you eventually go down. Killer like a chase killer. That way, if they do have an EMP, say you shoot a pod at a loop, and they EMP it, we'll just shoot it again. Like, you're right there. It's not like you have to go across the map to reset up anything up. Take another 2 seconds to shoot it up again. Now, it's not so easy because sometimes as you're doing that, they're running to a different loop, and then it's not so great. So that's why the killer is struggling against good teams right now.
After all, Scott likes Singularity because Singularity can bulldoze through chases and do the one thing that Scott enjoys doing in a way that Skull Merchant can't. If Skull Merchant offering no mechanical counterplay is enough to be badly designed, then the entire game of Dead by Daylight is badly designed, because time efficiency in the macro play to put survivors in no-win situations is core to the gameplay and applies to every single killer on the roster with absolutely no exceptions. I guess we should all just move on to playing Subutio or Roblox Hunger Games or the ultimate gaming experience, Shaq Fu the Legend Reborn. Being in situations where your mechanical skill is irrelevant, where you have no choice but to get hit, is a part of Dead by Daylight at its core. Even the killers that Scott would claim, and has claimed before, are paragons of good design. Either the possibility of losing a health state with no mechanical counterplay is always bad design, like Scott says, in which case we should just throw the whole game out, or we understand there's a little bit more complexity to it than that. We have to look at it as a case-by-case basis. And looking at it by a case-by-case basis, Skull Merchant has pretty reasonable survivor interaction from the point of view of resource management and macro play. At least that's how I would define reasonable. If you don't find that resource management appealing to make a fun killer for you, then that's fine. Hell, if you don't think it's even reasonable, then that's also fine too. You're using your own criteria to assess these design qualities, and in doing so, you're kind of ignoring the reality of this game as a 1v4 resource management experience, because you only care about the 1v1s. And that's fine. But just acknowledge that then, instead of harping on about how bad the design is just because you don't like it. Not interesting to me and badly designed are not the same thing. Whether or not you actually use the word objective, because bad design implies a measurable and consistent set of traits, something quantifiably and consistently bad regardless of your tastes, not just an indication of what you do or don't prefer.
Survivors, I don't know. I guess they have to run around, like, disabling them, but then you can just reset them again. I don't know. It just still seems like that would just be such terrible design. It'd be so boring to go against. Yeah, of course, you have to take into account the survivors can hack the drones, yeah. But, I mean, they're still able to be reset, and that still doesn't necessarily result in anything engaging.
You'll notice throughout this video that Scott uses terms like not engaging, not fun, and bad design, or almost interchangeably. And that's confusing because those words don't mean the same thing. Bad design is something that's measurable, something that's reproducible, something that regardless of your preferences, you can come together with others and come to a consensus on. Old Legion is badly designed because there is no metric by which that power design is functional to create a healthy gameplay experience. But not fun is entirely subjective. Like, Scott can say, I don't find Skull Merchant fun, and I can say, I find Skull Merchant fun. And neither of us are right or wrong. It's just our opinions. But if I was to say, Skull Merchant is well designed because I like her, then I'd be being disingenuous, I'd be being intellectually dishonest. And Scott continuously conflating bad design with I don't like it is kind of everything wrong with most of this video. Before we move on to talking about Skull Merchant's mechanical counterplay, there's a couple of misunderstandings about the drones themselves that I'd like to address. At one point, Scott claims that you can just reset the drones,
Disabling them, but then you can just reset them again. I don't know. It just still seems like that would just be such terrible design. It'd be so boring to go against. Yeah, of course, you have to take into account the survivors can hack the drones, yeah. But, I mean, they're still able to be reset.
But one of the major reasons this rework is an improvement is because you can't do that. You can't immediately recall and replace a badly deployed or useless drone anymore. You're actually punished for putting it in the wrong place now. And Scott also suggests that when placing drones, you need to choose whether you're going to be using them as a chase tool or a trap tool, like it's some incontrovertible, inflexible choice. But that couldn't be further from the truth. You've got 6 of the damn things. You can set 4 or 5 in the environment as you go, and keep the rest on hand, kind of like Trapper would keep a trap on hand at all times, to zone survivors out of a specific tile when you need it, or even for the stealth. And a key part of micromanaging this killer is realizing which drones are outliving their usefulness, finding the downtime to take them down without getting fucked by your cooldowns, and working out where it would be best to reuse it so that you don't have to take it back down again. Bad Skull Merchants who can't keep track of the flow of the game, don't pay attention to their drones, and don't have that awareness of their downtime are going to suffer for this significantly. And here's where we're going to come back around to the idea of Skull Merchant having no mechanical counterplay or skill expression. Because Scott has treated this idea like it's completely true. Like it's the most obvious thing in the entire world. And he's wrong. And if you're paying attention in this video, you'll see exactly why that is. As you can see in the B-roll of this video, and as Scott even points out himself, drones don't pick you up when you're crouching, even if you're crouch walking. You can see from the
Or just crouch.
When a survivor, and even in places where shit like LOS breakers and tile shapes give you actual zero counterplay to a deployed drone, that gives her explicit mechanical counterplay. You can crouch at the right intervals to dodge drone beams, even in stealth mode if you can see the little lights on the drone. And if you're dead set on avoiding lock-on stacks, this is a perfectly feasible thing to do in chase a lot of the time, especially if you brought urban evasion. To show you, I'd like to introduce you to a good buddy of mine who's really come around to Skull Merchant in the past few weeks. My friend Shaders is a caster for Outrun the Fog who ran a lot of Skull Merchant 1v1s on the PTB on both sides. I'd like to hand over the mic to him for a second so he can help you lot become chess grandmasters and understand Skull Merchant's chase and counterplay in chase a little bit better.
Hi, I'm Shaders, or Kyle if you prefer. I'm a good friend of Will's, and I'm a student in computer science specializing in game development and design. I'm also a huge fan of Dead by Daylight, even playing it competitively for periods of time. I'm here specifically because Will has kindly invited me on to discuss a bit about the Skull Merchant and her counterplay post-rework. Now, I'm gonna preface this by saying I was the #1 Skull Merchant hater prior to this rework. I was also incredibly convinced that behavior was going to royally screw this up, but in my opinion, they kinda didn't. I'm mainly gonna be targeting Scott, I can't use my power here, Jun's point of her still being a leave loop and die later or stay and die now type of killer. Straight up, you're wrong. This new rendition of the Skull Merchant has so much counterplay, and I think it's important to remove prior biases from her downright terrible initial design in order to appropriately evaluate her gameplay with this rework. Oh fuck, I could have actually dropped that.
No, I expected you to.
Scott makes the point that when she puts up a drone, then you leave the loop. This isn't entirely accurate, as while you're in the loop, you have a few notable options if you stay, and staying may actually buy you more time than you had previously if you had just left.
Bro, how is it healthy design? She puts up drone, you leave loop.
I mean, yeah, if you're a pussy. So, for starts, being able to stand still in the drone offers a lot of value to avoid lock-on stacks. You only have to be still for a brief moment, less than a second in fact, before having the opportunity to move again. The effectiveness of this maneuver does depend on things such as your distance, the spacing between you and the Skull Merchant, and distance from the drone compared to where you're trying to head to. I found really good success with this in my matches and 1v1s, and it really does make a big difference. The ability to, while the drone is in stealth mode, crouch to avoid detection is invaluable. This is the type of counterplay that lets you keep moving while you avoid lock-on stacks. Similar to before, and with everything else in Dead by Daylight Survivor gameplay, this depends on the spacing and distance between you and the Skull Merchant. If it's not adequate, it's up to you as the Survivor player to make that call and potentially eat a lock-on stack. But this is far from the case every time, and you will find situations during a chase that allow you to play around the drone in this way. For example, is the Skull Merchant locked in animation? Did you just gain a bunch of distance from a vault? There's so much that comes into play, and all of these variables play a huge part in making these key decisions in a chase to buy as much time for your team as possible. If the drone is in scouting mode, this does mean you'll likely have to do a combination of standing still and crouch walking, as the beams in the drone may catch you out even if you crouch, unless you're directly under the drone. It's up to the Survivor player to find the right mix, and to try to avoid lock-on as best as they can. This takes not just practice, but also skill. A fundamental piece of Survivor gameplay many players haven't grasped is efficient spacing and pathing. The Skull Merchant in this post-rework form takes advantage of this by forcing players to be careful with their spacing, as if you aren't good at keeping your distance, she will be able to force lock-on or get a hit. That's not an issue at that loop, that's a large majority of the time a mistake that was made before you even got there. Let's take an example from a different character, the Plague, who is often compared to the Skull Merchant for each of their exceptional 3-gen potential. The Plague at the start of a trial is at her weakest, as she has nobody infected. The Plague, all things considered, can get a first injury quite easily, but the time that takes totally depends on how much line of sight or LOS the Survivor being chased is willing to give her. Moving this over to the Skull Merchant, it's not LOS, it's distance and spacing. Obviously, you do not want LOS with a drone, but if you're going to play with a drone in the tile, you'll need to deny the Skull Merchant distance to extend your chase as much as possible. Denying this kind of distance affords you the opportunity to play around these drones. That's why it's such a crucial skill. Another slightly more advanced piece of counterplay against the Skull Merchant would be keeping track of drone rotation intuitively, such that you can make an accurate prediction of when an area is going to be safe to enter and exit. This one admittedly isn't as realistic as the initial two for most players, but it is realistic for a player that has experience going against her and understands her drone rotations. Keeping track of these things in the back of your head is critical to countering her, and this is no different from keeping track of the crow positions and directions of the artist, or keeping track of the knight's guard type and position to extend your chases. All of these zoning style killers have elements that you're required to track to buy as much time as possible. if you just ignore these elements because it's the Skull Merchant, of course you're going to die fast, because you're actively hindering yourself from having a good chase by picking the easiest and potentially worst option for your own survival. I have so many other points I'd like to go on about, in particular the floating phantasm trap argument Scott made, which is wrong because the hag doesn't have an 8-meter radius to her phantasm traps, and her traps can be faked unlike Skull Merchants. But I digress. I feel like I've served my purpose here in providing a little insight on potential counterplay for this post-rework rendition of the Skull Merchant. Big thanks to Will for allowing me to hop on and provide some points of discussion on her gameplay and counterplay on the Survivor side. I appreciate the opportunity, and I'm excited to see how her gameplay evolves. See you in the fog.
There is no way to make trap-based killers engaging to go against at all.
And here's the icing on the cake. There is a very real chance that I'm just bad at New Skull Merchant. Shaders might have been given the room to make mechanical outplays to my drone placement because I suck. And I don't know if that's true or not. Honestly, it's too early to say. But if I don't suck, then it's proof that the killer has mechanical counterplay at all levels of play. And Scott's complaints about a lack of mechanical counterplay are total hogwash. The other alternative, of course, is that I do suck as the killer, which makes Scott's complaints about the killer having a fixed chase time due to an absent learning curve in his expression also total hogwash. The mechanical counterplay exists. Shaders is living proof of that. And it's pretty cool if you ask me. Like, I'm sorry, Mission Impossibling around place drones is fucking cool as hell. You don't have to enjoy it, but the counterplay is there. It's right there, clear as crystal. I hope I've covered things pretty comprehensively. Scott's central thesis is that Skull Merchant's absence of mechanical counterplay means that New Skull Merchant is, in his own words,
Shit design?
regardless of her strength. But not only is her mechanical counterplay not absent at all, and actually kind of sick, but even if it was, it wouldn't necessarily make her objectively poorly designed, so long as interaction is taking place that shows some level of skill expression somewhere in the kit. Disabling drone setup in advance, forcing her to play around her limited cooldowns and drone count, and only healing when absolutely necessary to deny drone value and therefore play efficiently while injured are forms of skill expression, whether you personally find it fulfilling or not. Aspiring to a fantasy where every health state a survivor loses is a direct consequence of a mechanical outplay is naive, and ignores the nature of this game as a 1v4, not a 1v1. And judging the quality of a killer's design by that metric to the exclusion of all other counterplay is perplexing to me. If that's all that you care about, hop on the DBD League Discord server and play on the 1v1 ladders. I'm sure they'd be happy to have you. I actually do mean this quite earnestly, by the way. Seriously, if you enjoy DB's 1v1 aspect a lot, do go check it out. At the end of the day, I know I'm not changing many minds on Skull Merchant. If you don't like her, you don't like her. I get it. And a lot of the time, there's nothing I could even say to change that, even if I wanted to. But we as a community need to stop conflating our own subjective priorities for what we want a killer to be with any semblance of objective design quality. I've done this. I've had 2 years of killers that I'm thoroughly unenthused about, but for the most part, they're not objectionable. I just don't find them to be terribly interesting. I've been an advocate for keeping personal criteria of fun out of discussion of design quality and fairness for years now, and Scott's reaction is the perfect proof of why. Because taking one person's preferences about what he wants a killer to be as the last word of good or bad game design is gibberingly insane, even if you happen to agree with that person. Oh, and one more thing. If you're one of those people who are just writing me off as a contrarian, or saying I'm just horny for Skull Merchant or whatever, or saying other such delightful things in the aftermath of Scott's video on me, seriously, just grow up. If you're not willing to engage me on good faith, to actually listen to what I have to say, and understand that I don't have to have some ulterior motive just to disagree with you, it suggests to me that you were never interested in hearing what I had to say. If you have nothing of value to contribute and just want to write off my critique, then all you're doing is polluting the discourse and wasting everybody's time. If you're going to act like that to me, or Scott for that matter, I urge you to just go away. It'll make everybody's life much easier. Everyone else, like and subscribe, do the YouTube ritual, you guys know the drill. Scott's reaction's in the description so you can go take a look at the full thing, and there's a link down there to Shaders' Twitch channel as well. So on that note, I guess I'll see you next time. Ta-ta for now.